Introducing public warehousing in Vietnam. My name is Laszlo KOZAR. I am the professor of the Budapest Business University. I am working in the public warehousing field for ages, in one hand. On the other hand, I started to research the Vietnamese agriculture and the financing possibilities of Vietnamese agriculture. I started this work more than 10 years ago. I am flying to Vietnam year by year, so these are the reasons I decided to create this article for this event. Content of the presentation. First is introduction. In this slide, I would like to introduce with a few sentences Vietnam as a Southeast Asian country which has a very important agriculture and the circumstances of introducing the public warehouse-based Lombard financing. After that, I would like to present and show the current situation of the Vietnamese agriculture, numbers and possibilities of the Vietnamese agriculture and the circumstances. After that, continuing the presentation, I would like to introduce the public warehouse and the Lombard financing as a new financing possibilities in this market, how to introduce it in Vietnam, and some background based on the Hungarian experiences. As I mentioned, I am working in this field for ages, and I think it could be a good possibility for the Vietnamese agriculture. And finally, conclusions, I would like to declare a few sentences how can it be very positive in case of the agricultural financing in Vietnam. Vietnam has more or less 90 million people population. In one hand, on the other hand, it's one of the fastest growing country in Southeast Asia, maybe the fastest. We cannot declare it exactly as the fastest, but more or less the fastest. We will see it in the next figure, in the next slide. So 90 million people, the population, very strong economy, and growing very fast, and involved in this, agriculture is a very important territory of the business. More or less the 20% of the GDPs comes from the agriculture, which is very high compared to other countries with developed agriculture. For example, European countries just like Hungary or France or Italy and the United States and Brazil, where are very developed agriculture, but the percentage inside the gross GDP is not more than 6-7%. So comparing with these countries, in Vietnam, the agriculture is a very important part of the economy. And 99% is private. The farmers are private farmers, all of the field owners are private, the companies are private, so the production, the rice and coffee and other productions are in private companies' hand. The current situation of Vietnamese agriculture. We can see two pictures in this slide, a figure on the left-hand side and a table on the right-hand side. Let's focus first for the left-hand side the figure. This shows us the growth of the GDP in Vietnam between 1980 and 2020. It's very interesting to watch this figure. We can realize that in 1990, which was the same time when the political system changed in Central Europe, from this moment, the economy in Hungary, for example, became 3 times bigger. But during the same period, this 30 years period, the Vietnamese agriculture became 30 times bigger. It's crazy. They changed the system in the same year. They didn't say they changed the political system. They said that they changed the economical system. So this picture, this slide can speak very loudly. And when I started to work in Vietnam, it was 2012, which is 10 years ago. During this period, the Vietnamese economy became 3 times bigger. In right-hand side, we can see the position of Vietnamese agricultural exports in 2020. So nowadays, we can say. The most important products are rice, coffee, pepper, from our point of view. We can see that in case of rice, Vietnam is the third, the next year it is the second exporter around the world. In case of coffee, Vietnam is the second and first. Year by year is changing. Brazil is the first all the times. Vietnam can be the second or the third, depending on the situation. Usually, Vietnam is the second in the coffee export and the biggest in Robusta coffee. Pepper, absolutely the first, but pepper is not a big quantity, I mean per tons, so from public warehousing point of view, it's not important. For us, the most important products are rice and coffee. So in the following, I will talk about these subjects and these products. This table shows us what is the biggest problem of Vietnamese agriculture export. If we watch the right two columns of this table, we can see that in case of rice, Vietnam is the third biggest, in case of coffee the second biggest, and in case of export price ranking, just 10th around the world, which is a very bad situation. So the main goal of introducing public warehousing in Vietnam to improve the ranking of these two commodities pricing. Rice yield and area in Southeast Asian countries between 1990 and 2020. The figure on the left-hand side shows the yield per hectare, while on the right we can see the growing areas. The position of Vietnam is shown by the purple line. We can state that both cases Vietnam occupies a favorable place in the competition. In fact, Vietnam has been the leader in the terms of average yield for 20 years now, and has doubled its yield in the last 30 years. The most important field crop products in Vietnam in 2022. So these commodities here, coffee, rice and corn, these are the biggest quantities. You can say that the coffee is 1.8 million tons, the rice is 46 million tons, corn is 6 million tons. It's altogether close to 54 million tons yearly. It's a huge quantity. We can see the prices in the middle column. The prices fluctuate, of course, and the prices shown here are a good approximation of the current situation. So we can see the values based on these quantities and these prices. Altogether, it's more than 33 billion US dollars. So it's a huge value. It's one of the biggest agricultural producer country. Comparing the size, we can say this is the biggest one, because Russia is bigger, Ukraine is bigger, and Brazil is bigger, but these countries are much bigger countries than Vietnam. So comparing the size of the country and comparing the population of the country, is one of the biggest producer around the world, and as I mentioned before, one of the biggest exporter in case of coffee and rice. In case of corn nut, they use the corn inside the country, and they import wheat plus. But in case of coffee and in case of rice, they are one of the biggest exporters. They are among the first three in both commodities. Introducing public warehousing in Vietnam. Public warehousing-based Lombard financing has long tradition, especially in countries with a large agricultural sector, such as the United States, France, Brazil, Germany, Italy, and Hungary. Hungary has 150 years long history in this field. In the period between the political system change in 1990 and the EU accession in 2004, the public warehousing and the Lombard financing became a true success story, then routine in the financing of the agricultural products in Hungary. A parallel can be drawn between the situation in Hungary in the 90s and the current situation in Vietnam. I would like to try to show it in the next slides. How can it be introduced in the Vietnamese agriculture sector and agricultural financing. How can it introduce an extra financing? How can it help to involve in extra financing in the Vietnamese agricultural financing? Just a few sentences about the tradition of Hungary in case of public warehousing. You can see on the left-hand side picture that in 1875 it was a law of commerce. It was introduced, the law of commerce, in this year in Hungary, and it was the first case in Europe that someone regulated the public warehousing at legal level. It shows how developed was the system at that time, but not just at that time. It was very long tradition, and it was very active until 1949, until the end of the Second World War and the starting of the communist system in Central Europe. It was exactly in 1949. In 1949, they forbidden to use the public warehousing in Central Europe, inside this in Hungary. So because of that, it was 40 years stop. We restarted after the political system changing in 1990. So it was a brand new act, but it was we had plenty of information about the old-time practice. So we restarted after the political system changing, and we introduced again the new public warehousing system. And as I mentioned before, it became very, very successful. After the political system changing, the first 15 years, it was a huge help for the agricultural producers, not just the agricultural producers, but other different types of producers, because of the stock financing, because at that time it was the financing market was very dry. So it was a big help for push extra financing into the market. It was a big success at that time. Nowadays it's a routine, everybody can use that. Nowadays it's not as important as it was at the beginning of 90s, but as I mentioned, I think it can be something similar in the Vietnamese agriculture. So if we can introduce it in Vietnam, it means that we can push extra financing into the market, similarly with the Hungarian 19 years period. Business potentiality of public warehousing in Vietnam. This table shows a comparison of the most important Hungarian and Vietnamese field crop production. It can be seen that the volume of the Vietnamese production is 6.5 times larger than the Hungarian one, close to 60 million tons, but its value is more than 12 times than the Hungarian one, close to 35 billion US dollars. As a general rule, we can state that in countries with a long tradition of public warehouses, about 40% of all field production goes into the public warehouses. As a result, we can assume that this is the case for Vietnam as well. This is what the numbers shows in this table. The table clearly shows that in the case of introducing the public warehousing, approximately 11 billion extra Lombard loans can be used to finance the Vietnamese agriculture, which on the one hand is a huge amount, would provide producers with fresh liquidity, and on the other hand would create an opportunity for them for deferred sales. Thus, both in the rice and the coffee market's position could improve in export price ranking. In case of Lombard credits, the financial banks financing approximately 80% of the value of their commodities, the warehouse receipts. This is the reason I declared 900 million US dollars in case of Hungary. So we involve this amount into the agricultural financing, and I mentioned the 11 billion US dollars in case of Vietnam, because this is the 80% of the whole commodities value. Conclusions. Conclusion can be drawn based on what was written in the article and what was explained in the presentation before. There is no public warehouse PV system in Vietnam and no current legal solution for public warehousing. This is a lack of regulation. The government should act primarily in the interest of local economic organization, I mean the farms mainly, so that extra financing can be channeled into the food economy, strengthening it and making it competitive on international markets. Public warehouse-based Lombard financing may be of great importance in the future in financing the rice, coffee, and other agricultural commodity markets in Vietnam. And its foreseeable future, it can mean more than 10 billion in extra financing in this sector, making much more competitive the agricultural export of Vietnam in the international market, especially focusing for prices, because Vietnam is one of the biggest exporters, as we mentioned before, in these territories. The main problem, the biggest problem of the export field of the agricultural export are the prices. Thank you very much for your kind attention.